Okay, hey, welcome to an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. So I have a really cool review, guys, from the brand Hitori watch company. A little about them. They are definitely influenced by Japanese culture, and we've seen kind of their entire lineup of watches over the years here on the channel. Now, in terms of the type of watch, typically they produce an everyday dress watch, looking for clean, classic, minimalist designs in sensibly sized cases. This isn't quite minimalist in design, but they definitely went for more organic inspiration. This is their Nexus, and this is in the Hanaasagi colorway, which literally means light blue flower, and it is a culmination of its design journey so far in terms of the brand. The Nexus speaks not only to the refined watchmaking, but to a quietly ambitious philosophy that continues to resonate with a growing community of discerning collectors. Now, the Hanaasagi color here is a traditional color in Japan, and these colors hold a special significance in the Japanese culture because they were once used as descriptors of social status and determined basically the social hierarchy. Now, this is their most ambitious Hitori release yet, and this goes for $940 from Nomen Watches. So this is not super cheap, but I will say when it comes to its inspirations, those are much more expensive watches. I know typically we've seen them really be inspired by Seiko and Grand Seiko. Here, I think they went an extra level and even threw in a bit of Minase into the mix with their multi-piece case, as well as skeletonization, and just overall more bold, kind of retro temporary aesthetic. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, now let's get into the dimensions here. Now, this is in a 39.5mm diameter, which I think is quite a sweet spot, but this is definitely more of a bold wear versus kind of the more traditional sizing. I think some folks would have probably preferred to see this in a 38 or maybe even a 37, especially in this tonneau shape case. That barrel shape definitely gives it some wrist presence, but thanks to the skeletonization, it also stays, again, quite svelte and balanced. Now, you're going to have that 39.5mm diameter again, with a 10.5mm thickness. That is actually very, very thin. I will say visually though, it's kind of tough to reconcile everything because it has this very smooth and ultra thin mid case, but then it kind of has the case itself sunk in, and just, again, it has this really interesting multi-piece layout, and I think visually it doesn't, it just actually makes it look more bold versus as slick and thin as it actually is at just 10.5mm, and that is with that nice box domed sapphire. Although I will say, you guys can see here at the outermost reaches, you're going to notice a bit of a slight milkiness there, depending on how you are viewing this and the viewing angle on that sapphire, which would be a less noticeable, of course, if it's the white dial variant, which I believe is coming, eminently. I don't know when, but I have seen some teaser shots there, so that is coming, so that will be less of an issue there. Slightly an issue here, but I'd say probably just more so, I would say highlighted because of the nature of the studio, in terms of it's a dark room with just two lighting sources versus in a much more well lit area, you wouldn't notice it quite as much because this dial would be a lot more brighter and reflective, based on the surroundings. Now, it does also have about a 47.7mm lug, and all these measurements are off of my own calipers. They're not just copied and pasted from the website spec sheet. And then in terms of the finish here, it's going to be mostly brushed with some nice polished finishes there. Actually, well, this section mostly brushed, and then maybe it's equal parts brushed and polished, because so much of this is polished, but then so much of that is brushed. Now, It does have that box dome sapphire with an inner anti-reflective coating, which does a great job of really being able to negotiate, the reflectivity here. Of course, in the studio, it's a little tough when you're like that. There's no amount of AR that's going to stop that from happening. But I'd say in reality here, it's going to render very, very clear and crisp. Now, the crown is screw down. I don't know. I like that it's 100 meters of water resistance. I like screw down crowns. This crown is a bit sharp. So unfortunately, not quite as refined. And when you screw that and unscrew that down, you're going to have to torque a semi kind of sharp piece. Now, not a deal breaker, but it is a deal to definitely consider. Inside though, very nice Miyota 9015 movement with this beautiful custom rotor, which honestly looks nicer than even the OEM Citizen rotor that they put in this movement and some of their more expensive Citizen watches. So very, very cool there. And you can see it even has that little bit of a kind of a hue to that back piece of crystal there, to where you can see everything inside. It does cast a bit of an iridescent hue, which is nice. Now, the movement inside does have a 42-hour power reserve and beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of that beat rate. And then in terms of the dial, guys, you do have this very cool textured dial with the frame date at 3 o'clock. You also get applied indices that are brushed and faceted. Look at that there. That's where you're getting more of kind of the Grand Seiko callbacks, especially when you think about like the Evolution 9 series. That's kind of the vibes you're going to be getting here. Look at the little micro striations there that again catch that kind of iridescence on the surface of those beautiful indices. Now, of course, you're going to still have some really cool skeletonized hands, although I will say visually it's, I'd say the lengths aren't super contrasty. Like, they're both very similar in length. Like, of course, when you take a look at it for a second, you can tell, like right now, that's the hour hand, and then on this end, and then the minute hand here. But I will say, I know my audience, and some people will say that's just not easy enough to decipher the difference between the two. And I'll say I understand that. I don't know if I agree with it, but I will say I could see how they could get confused, especially when the hands are across from each other and you don't have as quick of a reference to see, which one is longer or shorter. Although, of course, you can always look at the length of the tip versus the actual indice there. But again, I'm keeping it real here. I know sometimes people say I'm too soft on these reviews. I'm just overly positive because I'm so excited and I get kind of caught up with things. I'm keeping it real on this one. This is a cool watch, but it's definitely not for everyone. It does have some things that I would consider kind of flaws, but again, that kind of goes with the whole design ethos here and kind of that Japanese wabi-sabi, right? This isn't meant to be perfect. This is meant to be, it's meant to exist for it to be itself. And I think with that, and kind of that philosophy, it's fun. I love that, about it. Now, you are going to get 100 meters water resistance, and it's constant inspiring because your crown's not going to be popped out by accident. So that's nice. You're getting 20 millimeter lugs that are, of course, skeletonized on the top side. And then this bracelet tapers from 20 millimeters down to about 16 millimeters. And then it comes down to this 17.5 millimeter push button clasp there, semi-milled. You got the milled folding section with the pressed clasp section and some very nice little pushers here. Now, you're also going to get 2 positions of manual micro adjustment, which is not a lot, but also you don't need a lot because look at how short these links are. They're basically as long as half links. So you're going to be able to dial it in quite nicely. Another nice thing you're going to notice is this beautiful 5-link layout. It doesn't have fitted end links. You can see they're not necessarily straight end links. You can see they are contoured so that it has been thoughtful in terms of the articulation against the case. And then also, interestingly enough, the underside brushed If I can get it to focus. Doesn't want to. Let me just get it there. There you go. Brushed. And then on the outer side, though, polished. So that's a little different, right? So yeah, I think that's interesting. And of course, with the level of articulation here, that 5-link setup, it's going to flow and it's going to reflect, the light in a lot of fun ways. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, I think it wears nicely. Of course, it does have that tonneau shape case, but it has quite an expansive dial. So as much as that tonneau shape case is doing it favors, that larger dial is going to give you a lot of visual impact. But you can see it rides really low slung on the wrist. And it is quite thin. Look at that. I mean, it's the fact that angles wise, it kind of accentuates some of those vertical lines, but I will say it wears quite svelte, not too shabby at all there. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, it's going to make the watch seem a lot larger all of a sudden, and that's because you're going to get a fair amount of perspective distortion versus when I put my wrist here, look at that, all of a sudden it seems a little bit more centered. You're seeing more of the sides of my wrist and therefore the sides of the bracelet that's draping. So what I'll do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame here so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a true aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist, and check that out. Again, it's just something different. I do enjoy this. Now, of course, I am pointing out things that I think could be better, but the fact is this watch challenges me. There are quite a few pretty straightforward homages that I've reviewed over the years, and it's easy to just focus on things like execution and quality, and it's easier to make quality things at lower prices these days. What hasn't gotten easier is design, and I really, really can appreciate the fact that Hitori Watch Company just go that extra mile in terms of creating something, and this is a step, I think, in the right direction where they're not making a direct homage. They are really finding kind of their own footing here, and their own design language, which I think is a lot of fun. And of course it does still pay homage to brands that are, already existing, but they're also quite expensive legacy brands like Grand Seiko or even just regular Seiko, right? When it comes to, some of their other diver models, or brands like Minase, where, oh my goodness, those things are very, very niche, but very interesting, very complex, and they just take less of a minimalist approach than Grand Seiko do. So when you see somebody come along and really kind of pay tribute to that more bold ethos, I think it just comes together in a really cool, fun way. Like, look at this thing. It's like retro futuristic. Like, this is what people thought the future looked like in the past, which I think is just kind of fun. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get it off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Okay, so I said loom shots, but there's no loom. So here's the shot. I get to do in some low light transition because I was going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. I mean, even here you can see, look at that. Those indices are reflecting in this low of a lighting condition. So very, very cool. Yeah, and you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight or getting perfect studio lighting. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings, walking underneath the overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And my goodness, guys, look at that dial. One thing I every time I see these dials, the missing feature for me is a top coat. These dials, I think they could add so much depth if they just did a clear coat. Those very glossy, it would add an extra dimension to it, and it would also help with the way that this reflects. You can see there all of the micro textures are capturing light, and they're just being a little bit more reflective, which can cause the dial at times to maybe wash out a little bit. So you would prevent the washing out, and you would add quite a bit more depth and 3D pop to that. But of course, it does add maybe a little bit of thickness there. So I don't know. You tell me, Hitori, what are you going to do? I think it would be a huge step in the right direction in terms of making these watches feel that much more expensive. Although, again, even as is, it does give you that vibe. So, with that out of the way, guys, so there's no lume, but now we know what it looks like in most lighting conditions, right? Very, very wide spectrum there we just kind of covered. But this thing is a good-looking watch. It's just different. It pops. So for me, guys, closing thoughts. On the wrist, interesting barrel-shaped silhouette, wears really well, and the skeletonization adds some fun visual interest. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, though. Some may even consider it over-designed. Well, I think it just kind of straddles the line between bold and over-the-top really well. Like, it's borderline wild card watch. In terms of model variants, do check the site links for options and availability. Additionally, I do believe a white dial variation, or, pale silvery white, is also eventually coming soon too, so keep an eye out for that. In terms of comparable models, while most of Hitori's watches are Seiko and Grand Seiko inspired, I definitely feel a different Japanese brand's influence with the Nexus. With its skeletonized multi-piece layout, I think it does a nice job paying tribute to the Minase brand, and but with a lot more affordable price point there, and it's more affordable, more attainable, whatever you want to say. It's cheaper, yes. Even at almost $1,000, at $940, it's still much cheaper than an actual Minase or Grand Seiko. So, it's just different. But, with that, I think it's just, it's more affordable by comparison, right? Which is great. And again, it does a nice job kind of representing and being a facsimile of a more affordable version of the complexity of a Minase. So yeah, for me, guys, bottom line, while clearly not a mass market type of watch, I do think a lot of enthusiasts who appreciate the craftsmanship and artisan qualities of Japanese brands like Grand Seiko and Minase, but don't have the commensurate luxury wristwatch budget, will find a lot to enjoy here. But you let me know down in the comments below what you think. If you liked the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.